Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 38, and we're going to kick things off slowly with this T-28 prototype game from NDCX. You may recognise his name more these days from Warships replays in this particular video series, but he's been trying a little bit of tanks again recently, and this is one of the games he had. I think one of the best games he's had. To use his words. Now the prop isn't a tank that's hugely popular. It's slow, it does at least have a good gun, but even though it has a turret it doesn't go all the way around, so it's rather possible to troll these things by just sitting behind them. The only decent armour it's got as well is entirely at the front, so that makes it vulnerable to any kind of flanking manoeuvre, and also artillery in particular. Party gets a shot into your side armour, that can be very bad news. That is of course still true for the one above this, the T-30, which is a very worthwhile machine to get to. And the American heavies, they don't have particularly strong hulls, so at least from the side. So they are rather vulnerable in that regard. So that OI is done. He did get a bit of damage. He's also gotten some spotting damage because of his binoculars, and binoculars are a good choice for this. It used to have, I think, okay view range. I think it might... I'm not even sure. Having said that, you know, maybe it hasn't even changed from what it once was. I have a memory of it being like 350. Maybe it's still 350. But yeah, the view range... I think that was... Yeah, I'm having memories of thinking that the view range was actually not that good, even though it was open-topped. Yeah, it's all coming back to me now. I have played through this thing myself, but it was quite a long time ago. It was before it was HD and before it got the closed top. So maybe that just happened and it didn't lose any view range and I was just kind of spouting nonsense there. So yeah, I have a feeling that was one of the things that always irked me about it, in addition to it being rather slow. But you know, when you can get the gun to bear, it's pretty nice. The firepower on this is actually pretty decent. It's that 120mm American gun that you find on various other machines. Like the other tier 8s that share are of course the T-28, the non-fictional tier 8 American tank destroyer, and the T-34. And of the three, I think the T-34 is the best of them. I mean, it's not maybe the most popular premium tank, but you compare it to the T-28 and this thing, yeah, it's not hard to pick it as a clear winner. So slowly moving forward. He doesn't really have any choice about that part, but yeah, if he's lucky he will get there, or maybe some side shots across the lake of the IS to do some more damage. But this has always been one of those machines, like the British tank destroyers, or the armoured British tank destroyers, the Nuffield line, where they are better in a defensive role just because of that lack of speed. And the armour, whilst pretty good, is only really any good if you're top tier. And when you're close to, well, there's those commander's hatches, and also just the turret face. There's these two, I don't want to say bevels, but there's flat areas next to the gun mantlet which are just flat 200mm of armour. So even when you're top tier, when the armour is going to be at its most effective, there are plenty of things that can just punch through. So a nice hit onto that Jagdtiger from this range, although a bit of a low roll, unfortunately. But just the fact we hit him at all. It's not the most accurate gun, this. It's not bad, but Wargaming likes to make you pay the penalty for having a turret with reduced accuracy. Now the IS has taken a peek out, so he gets a hit into him. That IS has been in such a funny position. I'm not entirely sure what he was thinking he was going to do from there, but anyway. So Andy's just left in this position of tailing slowly behind his allies, who are actually getting quite beaten up in the process of getting to the enemy base. And the fact that there's this almost full health camping IS there is not doing them any favours, because he's just been able to pop out with all his hit points and go, haha, surprise, it's me! This was my brilliant master plan all along, and I wasn't just hiding behind a rock and letting my allies die. Honest. So, with the IS there's an 88 defending, and his allies on the west having died to the CDC and the Jagdtiger. This is all looking very close and very tight indeed. So it's maybe going to come down to the fact that Andy is finally here, and he has full hit points because his remaining non-artillery allies have both died in the span of about 2 seconds. So the 88 he doesn't have to worry about so much. The CDC in principle could be bad news, but he's got so little health that he really isn't that big of a threat. The IS could also be a one-shot, but by far the thing he most has to worry about is, at this point, of course, artillery. So he takes out the CDC, and that's probably the thing left with the best mobility that we would have to worry about. I mean, the IS mobility isn't bad, but if the CDC got ran behind him, that would have been bad. Anyway, so also a hit into the IS, who's now left on low health. And if you can take this guy out, he's not even really taking cover effectively, then of course that leaves him free to maybe move up a little bit more. Now the fact that OI has died in quite this position, I think that OI has eaten one, if not more, artillery shells. That wreck is proving to be quite useful, just because of the sheer size of it as well. Although I mean, none of their artillery, they've got 2 left, and they're actually both reasonably mobile. None of their artillery seems to have repositioned particularly. So they're all firing at him from more or less his front arc. So if any of them do hit him, it'll be into his front armour. Now that shot there, that's just downright unlucky. But in return, he gets a very close miss from the Lorraine. So he was both lucky and unlucky right in the same instant, taking the tracks of the M12 off, but at the same time not getting hit by the Lorraine. So the 88 is pushed forward a bit, which is bad news for him, because that makes it even easier for Andy to hit his weak spot, and with his gun, he's a little bit doomed, just a little bit. It is possible that he was doing this to try and distract Andy from the fact that, oh, there's an artillery driving up behind you, but no, then he just drives out in the open. He's not actually using the rock at all. So the M12's taken a pot shot and missed. We know where the Jagdtiger is, and provided he doesn't get incredibly unlucky by getting derped in the rear, this should be doable. And in fact, the Jagdtiger must have just been sat in the same spot because artillery has just finished him off. So another close miss from the Lorraine. This one does do a little bit of damage, but it's now down to Andy and 2 artillery versus the 2 enemy arties. So he's basically being the world's slowest scouting tank destroyer at this point. The both of these enemy arties can completely outrun him for days. So either he can push forwards to the enemy cap, or just try and take his chances and keep these guys spotted and hope that the RNG works in his allied artillery's favour. Because the chances of him getting the drop on either of these artillery pieces is rather remote. They're just a little bit too mobile for a lumbering beast like the T-28 prototype. So potentially the M12 is looking to come around and drop down and maybe get a shot into his side or rear armour. So Andy's quite cautiously and sensibly pointing his front more or less round in this direction and just trying to proxy spot this guy on the high ground. He might also just be hiding behind the church, maybe to try and ambush Andy from an unexpected direction. But, well, there's no sign of him there. And, oh, well, there he is. And Andy actually is able to get the shot off before the artillery does. Now, it would have been a complete snapshot for the arty anyway, but even just that slight moment of bringing his tank to a halt and letting the reticle aim, you know, you're always going to beat the aim time of an arty, even with something like this. I think the aim time's actually not too bad on this gun, on this machine. So, yeah. Again, no damage taken, really, and it turns out their own arty goes hunting and gets the final kill, and so he ends that game with an ace tanker and high caliber with 3.3k damage and another 2,500 assistance and spotting damage. And I think it would have largely been spotting, because he had, I think, 1 tracking shot into the artillery. I'm trying to struggle to remember if there were any other tracking shots in that. So I think that largely would have been Scout T-28 prototype, if not entirely Scout T-28 prototype. So decent XP and credits there. It's not bad for a tier 8 game in this thing. The ammo's not especially cheap. You don't have the boost that the T-34 gets, of course, but even so, it's not a bad profit. Next we have Zebedee in something that's a little bit faster. I wanted an antidote to that previous game. The biggest reason I picked that, I mean, it was a decent game in terms of its result, but it wasn't exactly thrilling stuff because it's a T-28 prototype and you don't get thrilling games in a T-28 prototype so much. So I wanted something a little bit faster, and a Cromwell B game seemed like a rather good... I was going to say compromise there. Compromise isn't the right word. Just a rather good choice is what I'm going for ham-fistedly. So I'm going to guess this thing has optics and a very good crew. He's also got the food consumable. So this is full, you know, pro Cromwell B right here. He does even have a lot of premium shells, but you will notice he doesn't reach for them prematurely. His proportion of AP to premium is quite high, but when you can see tier 8s, even I almost said tier 6s, it is a tier 6, well done. I'm doing well today, but you know, I'm still doing better than I would have done if I tried to record this yesterday. Yesterday my brain was just like, I don't know, it was in sleep mode or something the entire day. But yes, he's clearly, I think, got this because, or got that ammo setup because he's rather used to seeing tier 8s, and you would be. Like, if you can afford to take that much premium ammo, and it is a premium tank itself, of course, then why not have that insurance against tier 8s? It all comes down to how you use the ammo. And in this case, he's going through his AP. He's not just spamming APCR at people unnecessarily. So he got all that early spotting, or rather he spotted those tanks and actually took out the KV-2, which is a rather dangerous opponent on the enemy team. But we can see from his own team, they've not gotten very far out of the cap. So that maybe constrains him a little bit in terms of where he can go and what he can do. Now the remaining enemy tier 6 heavy has gone through the dry riverbed, or well, the riverbed, it's mostly dry, and he's getting a couple of shots in, but also he's just spotting this guy for artillery and probably other things taking pot shots as well. So that M6 is a little bit doomed. There's other things around as well, but it's just, this is one of those games where it's like, yeah, the enemy team doesn't seem to be doing so well, but then his own team doesn't seem to be doing so well, so it's who derps themselves into the ground faster kind of thing. So the M6 has managed to get away with his life. That Hetzer, unfortunately, not so much. We do know there is a rather dangerous top tier medium platoon on the enemy team in the form of the enemy Cromwell and T-34-85. And of the rest of the team, well, we know there was an arty spotted by him going over to the one line. We know there's a Churchill that was spotted on the north, and rather hapless 38T who's just been murdered by their IKV-103 tank destroyer who was still camping back at base. And it doesn't appear like they do have anything else back at base. So most of the enemy team is accounted for, but it's the artillery that largely isn't, and then some other things that aren't. So that Matilda BP's actually finished off the IKV. He's now dropping down into the middle because being shot by a rather mean Cromwell, which is just unfair. Very unbrotherly to shoot a fellow British tank, but there it is. So with his view range, in fact not with his view range, he's just in the render range even of that Churchill, and actually manages to get the kill. And that's where having the very good crew and the premium food would certainly help. They don't seem to have, like, the enemy team was so disorganised, and his own team were really disorganised as well, and it almost just leaves him free in the Cromwell B to just run around over most of the map. And so he's got this opportunity here for this rather long flanking manoeuvre. I mean, he's already used the K line to reasonably good effect to spot things. And there's another thing he spotted, the enemy bishop, who hastily gets down into cover. And he's been able to do it at such a range that he's not getting spotted by a lot of these enemy tanks in return. That's maybe one of the things that I mean, I think you can get the Cromwell to have a good enough view range to do that as well, but just the mobility of it plus the ability to give it a very good top view range. Yeah, the Cromwell B and the Cromwell can be a little bit overpowered when top tier, but maybe when you think of that, you think of people whizzing around and just, I don't know, spamming all the premium ammo, which he is now doing, but only because he's run out of AP. But this was a rather more cautiously approached game overall. He's not been diving through massive enemy formations and getting up close and personal with people. No, he's been using his view range very well. He's been using the fact the enemy team have just let him have so much map to work with very well. And it's now come down to just the enemy M44 and the enemy Cromwell, who is only at half health himself. So we know the enemy M44 was around here, but unless he's in the dip up ahead, he's clearly not around here any longer. And rather than try and get the Cromwell, he's obviously decided to concentrate on the artillery. And, well, probably a good choice because the Cromwell has been taken apart by some of the many camping people. Although, having said that, I think the Dickomax has already moved up at that point. So he skipped ahead a little bit just to where he spots it, and he's come all the way up here in a desperate bid to stay alive, but it's not going to work. This thing is just a little bit too fast to get away from. And there's also an M6 coming up from the other side, who's now finally venturing forth from the base area. I think he spent most of the game sort of lurking around E0. So there's the M44 trying to scurry away, scuttle away little artillery, but no, it's too late. He's definitely doomed at this point. And there we go, final kill. Completely unnecessary APCR, but it's, you know, that or HE at this point. So he was just 1 point off having elite spotting damage there. 1,338. 2,551 damage done. High caliber, ace tanker and a patrol duty medal for just lighting up so many enemy tanks while his team was damaging them. And unsurprisingly, that was all enough to put him really quite far ahead of everybody else because he was getting the spotting damage from the rest of his team. A lot of them weren't doing that much damage, and even the ones that were doing damage, he was basically getting a goodly chunk of that as spotting. So it all added up to quite a nice XP result, and quite a nice credit result at the end there as well, considering all the APCR he fired anyway. So, lastly, we're on to a Warships game and Armor in the North Carolina, the first of the fast US battleships. It is quite a playstyle change from the previous tiers, because up till tier 8 it's all the standard pattern battleships where they're really rather slow. They all chug around at like 21 knots. And so when you finally get your hands on the North Carolina and suddenly it's like, oh my god, I'm within peaking distance of, what is it, like 28 it does, 29? I can't remember offhand. I should know, I've got it myself. But it makes such a difference. It really does. Now to go with that, you've also got some fairly nice firepower. You've got 16-inch guns. So if you can stand the somewhat troll dispersion, I mean, once upon a time the North Carolina in particular I think was fairly infamous for being just ineffective at anything other than very close ranges. But Wargaming did buff it up a little bit, so it's now it's okay. It's fairly reasonable in that regard. It feels not especially super good, but not especially bad either. So this game, it's top tier, no carriers, only a couple of destroyers per side. I should maybe note this is NA. The matchmaking queues on NA apparently, this is just completely anecdotal evidence, but I've seen in various places, principally Reddit, but on the forums as well, people say there's just less destroyers around on NA, and laying the blame at the foot of the radio detection skill, or was it now radio finding? I can't remember now. Radio location, that's it. So I don't know. It doesn't feel like there are especially fewer destroyers around on EU, but there might be less Japanese destroyers in particular. I'd have to... It's the kind of thing where you'd have to keep a tally, and even just going through the your own individual battles, it still wouldn't be a particularly high sample count. Wargaming will know, though. So they've basically all clustered up around B, and getting B is rather important, but the thing is they're not even managing to capture this one point. So the lone enemy cruiser that we know of that went north to C has managed to cap. There are rather more ships that are opposite them in B and then down around A, and they've obviously managed to cap A as well, so this is not a great position. They're kind of stuck in the middle here. They don't have control of either end, and although there's not that many ships to the north of them, the fact that the enemy team does have that northern cap point, they've got a bit of pressure on already, and it's relatively early in the match. Now, as for himself, he's only landed a couple of hits so far, but believe you me, this is going to end with a pretty respectable amount of damage. In fact, and there we go. That's a nice start to it right there, getting a citadel on that enemy North Carolina. That's why you don't sail broadside in that thing. Yeah, basically Armor said, I think this is his best XP in a battleship, and when you see the damage, you will understand why. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. So perhaps sensing that somebody needs to do something, or else they're going to just lose on points, Armor decides to start heading down towards A and put some pressure on. Now, he doesn't have a lot going with him necessarily. I mean, he's a top tier battleship, which is good, and he's actually got the I can't remember what it's called now, but the skill that tells you how many people that are aiming at you. I mostly don't have that on my battleships. I mostly have that on cruisers and a couple of destroyers, but it's one of those skills where it's basically useful on any ship. Even in a battleship where you know you're going to get fired at and take hits, knowing exactly how many people are aiming at you, and then if you can figure out who those people are, then that can sometimes tell you, okay, I can get away with doing this, or you know, I can't get away with doing this because there's 5 people aiming at me right now, kind of thing. So it is always useful information to know. So, very nice hit into that Prince Eugen, who was just rather incautiously broadsided and is now hastily backing up, but it's not going to be in time to escape taking another hit from Armor. And he's also taking all kinds of fire from other ships here as well. Personally, I would have just thrown into forward gear and tried to turn as fast as possible, but this guy, he looks a little bit doomed. If he gets away with this, it'll be sheer luck. So no more citadels, but he's very low on health. And this guy really is a priority because he's got torpedoes. And as far as Armor knows, there's nothing else lurking around the corner with torpedoes, because one of the enemy destroyers that's surviving is still in B, basically blocking them from capping it. Although he's just died, there we go. And then what's left is a Shiratsuyu who's firing torpedoes in this direction, so we know roughly where he is as well. So he's having to turn to avoid the torps, which is not great, but there's enough cover between him and the North Carolina to at least make aiming difficult, but he's still taking some hits here. Oh, yeah, that could have been nasty. He did lose a bit of health, and he's had a turret temporarily knocked out, but the other North Carolina is doing considerably worse. The Cyclone that has been on the cards for the last couple of minutes is also now closing in, so that might hurt them, but it might also help them. It's one of those things where it's like the reduced view ranges and therefore the reduced information you have available. It can both, like, it just really depends on the circumstances. It can end up being really useful for you, but it can also end up really working against you. So this North Carolina trying to back up, but if he's trying to keep his angle, he's doing a really bad job of it. Armor could maybe be angled a little better himself here, although having said that, I'm no expert on the North Carolina. But if I was playing it, I would maybe keep a slightly straighter angle than this. He's maybe trying to keep his third turret in action, though, his aft turret, because getting the kill, getting that firepower out to take down that guy was rather important. Now, while this has all been going on, they've lost the ships that they had in B, because they pushed round, killed the destroyer, and then died. And so what's left is the Gneisenau that's gone up to try and cap C. There's Armor, who's capped A, and then the 2 cruisers that were with him, and they're now pushing back towards B, except they're pushing towards a knot of enemy ships. Now, the enemy team's taken some serious losses as well. They're only down to 5 ships. So there's only 1 ship difference between them. But because they held all 3 cap circles, even just briefly, but because they've held 2 cap circles, let's say, for so long, it's almost been too long for Armor's team, because they just now have such a serious points advantage. Now, they've gotten 2 of them back, which has slowed the rate of hemorrhage, but they've lost 1 cruiser. They're about to lose the Hipper as well, and so that's all more points to the enemy team, and that's just going to leave him and the Gneisenau all alone. So it's not going to be a very good situation to be in. It is in fact a fairly terrible situation to be in. Now, what's going in his favour is some of these enemies are rather low health, and 1 good blast takes out that Colorado in particular, so that's 1 nasty lot of firepower out of the way. There is still this relatively healthy New Mexico, and they have a Tirpitz as well, in addition to Fiji and I think it's a Shiratsuyu? The enemy destroyer anyway, so the destroyer in particular is a problem. The New Mexico, not so much unless he tries to ram, but the New Mexico isn't a particularly fast ship, and so the New Mexico can only really ram him if he lets it happen. And it's one of those things where you can't really tell an enemy player's intentions up until sometimes the very last second, at which point it's too late. So the Shiratsu actually gets spotted there, and this is one of those times when it being the Cyclone has kind of helped him, because I'm guessing the Shiratsuyu figured he'd use the New Mex being there to just try and get a bit closer, drop torps in a position where Armor cannot avoid them. But of course he was low health, and Armor went, oh, that's a destroyer, I'd better kill that, and that was entirely the correct reaction. So that plan failed, and that's probably the most dangerous enemy done. However, the Tirpitz is still fairly dangerous, and although this New Mex isn't going to get to ram him, he can still, like, if he gets a broadside, if he just even fires HE and sets lots of fires, between him and the Tirpitz, they could seriously wear him down. Now, he's angling back towards the Tirpitz at this point, who's fortunately hasn't actually taken the opportunity to fire a big broadside of AP into him. And then even more weirdly, fires HE. So, I mean, he's on fire, he's had to use his last heal and use his cooldown, but that Tirpitz, if he'd fired AP at that point, potentially could have taken out Armor, and instead, not so much. And he's still firing HE. So, this might be one of those people that's gone out, bought a Tirpitz and gone, ooh, HE does more damage, except doesn't actually do more damage. That's the World of Tanks trope. HE does more damage. Of course, in World of Warships terms, it's the AP Citadels that do more damage. Talking of Citadels, you actually Citadel the Tirpitz at quite close range. I think you're hacking there, Armor. Please stop it. So yeah, the potentially more dangerous enemy was down, but the fact that he was playing so badly means that he really wasn't dangerous at all. So that just leaves this New Mexico, who's been valiantly doing his best, but he's just got no hope now. I mean, Armor doesn't have a lot of health left, but the Gneisenau's coming round. He's actually dead bow on as well, this New Mexico. And Armor sort of makes a mistake here. He goes for the superstructure shots, and with the New Mexico just completely bow on towards him, he could have tried to pen him through the bows. With these 16-inch guns, that's more than possible. At least I think it is against the New Mex. No, it will be. Yes, it will be. But instead he went for the superstructure shots, and so maybe cost himself the chance to do a little bit more damage there. So another fire set by the New Mex secondaries, who is clearly focusing him because, you know, he's not got a lot of health left at this particular juncture. But what he does have is a boatload of damage done, and even if the New Mex is able to kill him, this Gneisenau is going to finish him off. But as it is, Armor gets that final kill after opening up the angle to get his front guns round, and ends with a Dreadnought and a High Caliber and 172,000, almost 173,000 damage done, which is obviously enough to put him quite high up, in fact at the top of the team with over 2,300 base XP. Now, next best was the Gneisenau. The rest of his team, not quite so impressive. There were still some decent results on there, but on the whole, I mean, a lot of his team were around B, and yet they just failed to ever really take control of the one area where all their ships were. It was only Arma pushing down and the Gneisenau pushing up north and securing those end cap points, and then eventually meeting again in the middle, that basically swung this back in their favour. And even right up to the end there, the amount of extra victory points that the enemy team had accumulated, they were still ahead, even though they were really down on ships, and even though it was actually really close, they were still quite comfortably ahead on victory points. So if the game timer had somehow ended at that point, the enemy team would have won. So you really do have to cap those victory points in domination mode, and it was in some ways needlessly close, but because it was so close, it was also very entertaining as a result. So hopefully you have enjoyed these 3 games, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.